Welcome back to the Success Blueprint. We are going to try something new today, something that I think is very informative and that we need to know about, and that is kind of a market snapshot. So Jason has been pulling up numbers, and we've been, pulling up the things that we talk about, I guess, the most. And so, Jason, what is it that you're seeing, or what is some of the things that you've pulled up that you want to talk about?
Well, I think a lot of people come to us and ask us, the number one question I think most agents get asked is, how's the market doing? What's going on? Is the market good? And I think 99% of agents just say, it's good. It's good. We're doing okay, or it's a little slow, or whatever. But it's such a bigger question than that. And so we just wanted to take maybe 20, 30 minutes and just talk about some of the things that we're seeing right now, just to kind of tell you kind of an overall picture of it. So we do have some national numbers, but then at the end, we'll have some more local numbers in that as well, that so we can kind of just get an idea of really where the market's at. So one of the first things that we're seeing on the national standpoint, as when you look at how's the market or how's it doing, is we look at delinquency rates or foreclosure rates, right?
Right.
And so they're actually down quite a bit. So they're actually down in the same ranges as they were, back pre-2000. So
what is it? Why do you think that is? Do you think it's just a low interest rates? Do you think it's people are more careful than what they were back then? Like, what is it that you're thinking?
It's hard to say. I think it's a little bit of a combination of that, right? So right now, it looks like the delinquency rate has kind of been coming down since about 2010. The foreclosure rate did spike just a little bit during COVID, and then it kind of dropped back off pretty rapidly. So we're in a pretty good spot right now. But I think what's causing it is people are staying in their homes a little bit longer now. I think that used to rotate out pretty quickly, and it's people are staying just a little bit longer, maybe partially because of the interest rates where they're at now. People didn't want to give up a 2.5% or 3% interest rate for a 6 or 7% interest rate.
Sure.
So that could be part of it as well, is they're not jumping into that next bigger step as quickly as they may have been 5-10 years ago. So we're in a pretty good spot for that right now, which is kind of a little bit surprised me because, we're starting to see an occasional foreclosure or bank-owned property,
right,
whereas it seemed like for years we hadn't. But nationally, they're doing pretty good.
Right.
People are keeping up on their mortgages for the most part.
Right.
The next thing we want to look at is kind of job gains since pre-COVID. Wanted to look at where we are at pre-COVID and kind of how that stacked forward and where we're at now. And Idaho is number one, which is pretty crazy. They have a 14.2% change since March of 2020 to May of 2025. So that's pretty incredible that for Idaho, we're doing really, really well. Idaho and Utah they're the top 1 and 2 in the nation right now. So
when I see that stat, and I could be wrong, I've been wrong before, but you see those states, on the coast, you see Washington, Oregon, California, those have, a lot lower compared to Idaho. And since 2020 till now, we've seen a lot of influx of people moving, from there over to Idaho. So, do you think those people are moving over, and a lot of that pertains to they're moving from out of state and getting jobs, or what is it that you think?
I don't know. I think a lot of that, some of it's probably that. We do see those states that are in the green on this chart that they are typically, I don't know if you're Republican or Democrat, but they're typically red states that are growing a little bit faster. Texas is another one. Florida's another one. And then you have the Carolinas that are doing pretty well. Other than that, it drops off pretty quickly into most of the rest of the country. But so it's not just red states, but I think those states where you see, we've heard for the last 4 or 5 years, where if people can work remotely, where do you want to live? And they're moving out of their state into other states. The states where you are seeing that growth is where you're seeing the green. So
sure,
that's definitely part of it, for sure. And maybe it's just industry keeping up with those people that are moving in as well.
Right.
It's creating the demand for more jobs in those areas, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we look at the same. It's basically the same chart, just over the last year instead of since pre-COVID. And so over the last year, we're still doing good. We're not number one, and that looks like South Carolina takes that spot, but we're right behind them. 2.6 growth over the last year. Of course, that includes all of Idaho. We're getting the majority of our growth in the Boise area, but we're still seeing it on this side of the state where we're seeing pretty good growth,
right?
Which is helpful. So existing home sales. That's the thing where we're actually pretty low on. We've been pretty low since the rates jumped in, what was that? Late spring, early summer of 2022 is when rates jumped.
Right.
And since then, I mean, we were pretty high. I mean, nationally, they were selling over 6 million homes a year. And that dropped pretty dramatically in 2022 down to 2023. And we've been just over 4 million ever since. And so that's a pretty dramatic drop, good 30% drop just in over that course of 1 year. And then we've held on to that pretty consistently since then, nationally. So nationally, it's still pretty low. However, the biggest thing about that, the most interesting point about that, is that we have such a bigger population now,
right,
as a whole in the U.S. than we did. So there's definitely some pent up interest and some demand that's going to be coming, and we'll see what sparks that. It could be lower interest rates. It could be a lot of things.
And that's what I don't know. I could be wrong, but but people graduating college, high school, things like that are also maybe these classes of years of people who are now able to buy or getting jobs and things like that. So that's what I think when interest rates become a little bit easier, maybe more affordable, then I think that it's really going to take off, because there's just, like what you said, that pool of buyers that are just kind of waiting for something to happen.
Yeah. One thing that offset that chart a little bit is the new construction homes. New construction homes has actually increased over the last couple of years.
Right.
And so that's offset it a little bit, but existing homes is still down in those lower ranges. This one's pretty interesting. So back in the 70s, we were pretty close across if you took the states and put them in quadrants of basically the Northeast, Midwest, South, and West, and just comparing the pricing of those quadrants, they were pretty close back in the 70s, right? And there was a little bit of difference, but not a ton. I mean, Northeast was by far the most expensive then. But there's pretty big change now, pretty dramatic. So when you're just looking at average price points, the Midwest is definitely the cheapest, around the $330 mark. And then you have the South bringing up just a little bit above that, and then the Northeast, which historically was always the most expensive,
right?
They're at the $524, but then the West is kind of taken off and beat everybody out of the water, and that's kind of interesting. That migration west, it's just made those home prices out here substantially more. Where Idaho, when I first moved to Idaho, just 15 years ago, it was on the lower end,
right, of
pricing, and now people moving from the middle of the country, I'll say how expensive it is here.
It's crazy. I mean, being in real estate for as long as I've been, it was crazy when a first-time home buyer could buy a home for right around $100,000.
Yeah.
And then now it's way different.
Yeah, now it's probably $3?
Yeah, $330
unless you're going to spend some money
getting a townhome or something like that. Yeah. That's pretty crazy.
It is. It's changed quite a bit. This one, though, kind of addresses what you're just talking about. It's kind of interesting because this is wage growth versus consumer price index. And so what's consumer price index back in 2022 was substantially higher than wage growth, but that's flipped. Since early 2023 and continuous, the percent change year over year of wage growth is actually outpacing and growing faster than consumer price index, which is a good thing, right? Because we all hear of inflation, everything's getting more expensive. However, this shows us, at least nationally, that wage growth is actually growing at a faster pace than the index, which is a good thing.
Right.
It's going to allow people to hopefully continue to afford those homes, even though they're more expensive.
Right.
So now we want to just kind of talk about a little more locally, Eastern Idaho. What are things going on here? So when people ask that question, as I mentioned at the beginning, they say, how's the market? What are things doing in the market? It's like, where do we start, right? I mean, do we go national? Do we go local? What are they really asking? And so a lot of times we'll have to ask questions of, I'm curious why you ask that, because that totally can depend on our answer, right? So this shows us, as we showed nationally, the year over year of number of sales kind of trending and kind of just stagnant those last few years. We're showing similar results here. Year to date, we are kind of dropped, and if you look in that, it looks like we dropped over the last few years about 20%, a little over 20%. But this year, if you just look at year-to-date numbers, we're actually up 10%. So we've made up 10% of that. So here locally, we're actually seeing an increase a little bit. We're still not back to the peak numbers where we were, but we're getting back to those numbers where we were just back in like 2015, 16. So that's good. Whereas nationally, they're still looking back at numbers that were like 1996.
Right.
So we're seeing that grow just a little bit, which is a good thing. If we continue on this trend, we'll be back to peak numbers here within the next year or two.
Right.
Which will be good. So we are seeing a little bit of a trend upward that way. Months of inventory. That's always a good one of your favorites, right?
So the month of inventory, what's crazy is I don't think people really pay attention to it as much as they should, right?
Okay.
Because I think it dictates really the whole market and really why house prices are where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, if we are trending, so there is a line on months of inventory that shows kind of the balanced and fair market, but we never stay there. We're always either trending past it one way or the other.
Right.
And so we do see under that line is typically a seller's market, where sellers are being able to get pretty close to what they're asking for their homes. But it does change a little bit as it's trending upward. So as you can see, we are trending upward the last few years. There's a big spike when things first hit, and then we kind of leveled off through 23, and then the last little bit, we've been trending more towards a seller or more towards a buyer's market as well. So as we're trending up, we do see home prices stagnate a little bit. So that's why we haven't seen home prices really increase the last year or two.
And so that's what I mean is when we look at that graph, a lot of people are still pricing their homes from 2 or 3 years ago of what their neighbor sold for or what they feel like their home is sold for.
Yeah.
And so as we see the inventory increase, we know that, supply and demand is starting to change a little bit. And so we're starting to get a lot more supply than that demand, which then creeps it back up. And I feel like a lot of it's pricing. Yeah. And so then now it turns into a buyer's market, which then sellers now get less. And I think that that's such an important thing for buyers and sellers to know, because if buyers buy now, they can refinance someday. Hopefully it's soon, but someday. Sellers need to understand that it's changing. It's a lot like the weather. It just changes every, all the time.
Yeah, and some people don't realize how much in some neighborhoods it affects it when, as we mentioned, the new construction has been selling pretty good, right? And that's true here as well. And some of those areas where there's a lot of new builds, if that builder has adjusted their pricing, it really affects the pricing of the other homes in the neighborhood.
Right.
And so some of those, when we looked at that as far as actual increase in value on homes, we saw existing neighborhoods actually increased in value around 4%, whereas the neighborhoods that were new and they had builders in that actually had to decrease a little bit. They saw about a 4.5%, almost 4.6% decrease in those neighborhoods. And so it can really affect that based on what they're doing. And sometimes they're not doing it just because the home isn't worth that. Sometimes they're doing it because they need to meet a number of sales that month. And if they're not there, they need to drop their prices to hit that sales. And so, but it does really affect all those homes around them.
Sure.
So interest rates, they're pretty much leveled off for the last few years, which is kind of crazy. We were kind of volatile for a little while. We dropped. Obviously, they had amazing interest rates for years. And now we're back to kind of normal rates. I think it was kind of a shock to the system, and that's why we slowed down on sales at first. But I think people are starting to get used to that. The most interesting thing about this is when you look at the 50 and 30-year averages, we're right in between that right now. So year to date, we're at 6.79, and we're right in between the 7.73 and 5.89 of the 50 and 30-year averages. So historically, they're not terrible rates.
Right.
Everyone it's just all perspective, right?
And it's obvious. I mean, you see it coming down, right? And so when it's coming down, everybody's fine when it's at that price. But then when it's all the way down and goes back up, we don't like that. So it's like, it's more like they took something away instead of giving something to us.
Yep. Yeah, and one thing that I heard just recently is that the Fed rate, of course, they're thinking about dropping the prime rate down a little bit, right?
Right.
They're thinking about dropping that next month in September. But if a lot of people expected a half point, now they're maybe a quarter point. But what most people don't realize is that doesn't directly relate to, it does affect it, of course, but it doesn't directly relate to mortgage rates.
Right.
So people in the news, they hear that and then they go run to their lender, and their lender's like, well, our rates haven't changed. And they're like, well, Fed rate just did. And sometimes it doesn't really matter. It really follows the bond market and the 10-year treasury yield much closer than it does the actual Fed rate.
Right.
So Bonneville County, if you dial it in even a little bit more, it's pretty interesting to see. We have our average sold price right now is $428,000, which is pretty crazy because that average price just a few years ago was under $200,000.
Right.
So most values have gone up. That average doesn't directly affect or directly relate to values of your home. If you had a home that was on the average at $200,000, 10 years ago, it's not necessarily worth $428,000 now. This has to do with a little bit of people potentially buying bigger homes, and the interest rates maybe not affecting them as much. But our average price, that's pretty interesting to see that's up. It's been up over $400,000 now for 5 years, so or 4 years at least. So it's pretty cool to see. But if we look at this closely as well, the average sale to list ratio, even though we've been a little bit flat on sales overall, the sale to list ratio is still 99%. So what we're seeing a lot of is those homes that are priced right are selling and selling pretty close to that price. Homes that are overpriced are thinking they'll get the pricing they could get, during COVID or just after COVID, are not selling. And
right.
So we're seeing a ton of homes come back on the market.
Well, and it's interesting from 2 years ago, how much more affordable homes there is on the market. I mean, they may not be in the condition or, what everybody would want. However, at least there's options. Yeah. So I would imagine when rates do drop just a little bit more, that's going to really change.
Yeah, I think so too. And on that, I mean, where we're seeing so many people, I think that might be part of the delinquency too. So some of those people that are trying to sell to get into something different, if they can't, and that continues to happen, we might start to see more delinquencies.
Right.
Just because if they need to sell and they're pricing it too high because they bought it, 2-3 years ago at a high price,
right,
and they have to price it high and it doesn't sell, they have to pull it off the market, we may see that foreclosure or delinquency rate rise. We'll kind of watch that over the next little bit to see if that happens. So kind of interesting. So this is, again, just diving in a little bit deeper on the sale to list ratio. It's looking like these are only of homes that actually sold. So there's a whole bunch of homes that they either pulled it off the market, they canceled it, they withdrew their home, and it didn't sell. But these ones are kind of interesting because if people are willing to make some price drops, and it doesn't look like too much, right? So just the last month, if they were willing to drop about 4%, they were able to sell. If they weren't priced right in the beginning.
Right.
And these are just averages, of course. And so some may have to drop more if they started a little too high. But based on this, people aren't having to drop too far. So the difference on these is their original list price, and then after they dropped it and when they actually got an offer. So most of the time, if we're pricing right, things are still selling really well, and they're still above typically when they bought, especially if they bought, pre, 2019, 18, 17, you're probably going to have some equity in your home. And so it's just a matter of getting that priced right at the beginning so that you can get it sold. Our average days on market right now is about 60 days, but nothing, they're not necessarily selling at 60 days. They're either selling usually in that first week or two because they're priced right, or they're waiting until, they have to pull off the market and not selling, or they're selling much later when they finally drop the price to where it should be. And so I think that's something for sellers to know right now is that you want an agent that's just not going to necessarily nod their head and agree with you on price and say, oh yeah, we can shoot for the moon and get that, because most likely you'll be just pulling it off the market in 6 months with it not selling. You want an agent that's going to be upfront, honest with you, and tell you what the home's really worth and what it can sell for. It'll just set you ahead and give you realistic expectations. And if you decide at that price you don't want to sell, that's great. At least they gave you the honest assessment of it.
Right. That's what I would tell people is, I'd rather let you down now than let you down later when we have the house under contract and you're expecting and planning and trying. So, sometimes we've seen it, we've done it, we've even tried it of trying to list somebody's home way higher than what they want it. And we can list it for whatever they want. It's just whether or not they're going to get it. And it's just, I think it's just a false hope, but I also think it kind of degrades the home as well.
Yeah, it does. And it's not necessarily our opinion, right? I mean, we're looking at comparables and what the buyers currently out there are making choices on and what they're choosing. And if they're not choosing these other homes because they're overvalued or overpriced, then they're probably not going to choose yours at overpriced either.
Right.
And so it's all about value. Either you're selling the next door neighbor's home or they're selling yours because one is going to be valued a little bit better. And so, yeah, I think I like that. I'd rather be upfront and honest with you now versus disappointing you later.
For sure.
Is definitely a good way to look at it. And a lot of agents, unfortunately, when the market shrinks a little bit and we haven't had quite as many sales, right? Some agents get a little bit, they just want the listing. And so sometimes they feel like to get the listing, they just want to tell the seller that, hey, it's going to be worth that. I'm going to be able to list it for that, no problem.
Right.
And yeah, they can list it for that, but again, it probably won't sell. And so you just want to make sure that you're using somebody that's actually using market data and analyzing your property properly.
Nice.
So, yeah. And I think that's about it. So I think when there's, when people ask us, how's the market doing? There's so many factors to it. I mean, between interest rates, between just market trends, what we're seeing.
Price ranges.
Yeah,
Counties.
It definitely varies in price ranges, varies in counties. And so there's really not just one answer to that. And so that's why I think most agents just say good and move on,
right,
versus just asking why they might want to know.
Right.
So if you do ask, just, let them know why, and we can truly answer that question a little bit better.
Sure.
And get into it a little bit deeper.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed our market update. We're gonna do more of these, and it's just hopefully gives you a good view of what's going on today in the real estate market, and help you understand a little bit more of some of the things that we're looking at, how we gauge of how to price your home, how we gauge to help you find a home that's gonna fit your needs, and why maybe what's more negotiable than others. So anyway, thank you so much.